The Story of Corn Man, written by Charles and Deirdre Wiley, illustrated by Andy Westhoff. For more information on the project, visit charleswiley.net/cornman. A serial story in several parts. Chapter 1, An Ordinary Man. This is a story that happened not long ago and not far away. In fact, this happened just the other day to a typical man living a typical life in a typical place that would seem very ordinary and normal and, well, typical to you or to me. But most would agree that what happened on this day to this ordinary man was not ordinary at all. It was, in fact, quite peculiar. But then again, you may also wonder, at the end of this story, if it could maybe happen to other people. Maybe it could happen to me. Maybe it could happen to you, too. As we begin our story, this very ordinary, typical man was living in a big, bustling city, and he had a very busy life. He would wake up in the morning, he would leave his apartment, and he would go places, and he would do things. He went to places like coffee shops and grocery stores. He did things like buy coffee and drink coffee, and he bought bread, and he bought chips, and he bought cereal because those were his favorite things to eat. And then he would come home and he would make coffee, and he would drink more coffee, and he would make sandwiches and bowls of cereal, and he would eat sandwiches and he would eat bowls of cereal. And he would also be very busy looking at news stories and funny pictures and clicking on things on his phone and taking his dog, Bonzo, on walks. So as you can see, this man had a very busy life and not much time for nonsense. Nonetheless, one night he had his last bowl of cereal for the day, and he went to sleep, and he dreamed a very nonsensical dream. In the dream, the man was walking through a field of tall green plants that rustled in the breeze. Snow was falling, but it was warm and sunny, and there was a fragrant, earthy smell in the air. The snow crunched beneath his feet as he walked. Crunch, crunch, crunch. What a strange noise this snow makes, the man thought, and he bent over to touch the snow on the ground. It was then that he realized that it was not snow that he was walking on at all. It was, in fact, fluffy white piles of popcorn. The white flakes falling through the air and onto the ground were not flakes of snow after all, but pieces of popcorn. The man looked around and also realized that the plants he was walking through were corn stalks, and they stretched out around him in all directions, as far as the eye could see. As he looked, beside him there appeared a table and a chair. It was just like the table and chair in his beloved kitchen at home, and on the table was a box of his favorite cereal, a jug of milk, and a bowl and a spoon. Excited, the man sat down in the chair and poured cereal into the bowl, but what came out of the box was not his favorite cereal at all, but a stream of kernels of corn. The kernels bounced and rang and rattled as they poured into the bowl. Disappointed, he put the box down. As he started to push back his chair, a small woman appeared beside the table. She was wearing a crisp suit and a name tag that just read, Corn Inc. Now, said the little businesswoman briskly. Eat up. After all, you need your strength. She picked up the jug of milk and poured it over the bowl of corn. But instead of milk, out bounced a stream of white popcorn. As sometimes happens in dreams, even though the woman seemed perfectly harmless, he suddenly felt overwhelmingly afraid of her. The man rose quickly to his feet, intending to run away, but found that he couldn't move. It was as if his feet were rooted in place. He reached down to frantically brush away the piles of white, snowy popcorn around his feet and discovered, to his horror, that there were in fact 2 thick roots growing out of the bottom of his shoes and into the ground. It was at that point when the man woke up with a start, feeling quite alarmed for a few moments, until he realized that it was all just a dream, and that Bonzo was licking his face with gusto. What nonsense, he thought as he jumped out of bed and went to the kitchen to pour himself a bowl of cereal. As the man sat down at his kitchen table to his bowl of cereal and cup of coffee, though, he could not get the strange dream out of his head. Trying not to think about it, he found himself reading the ingredients on his cereal box instead. Now you know how it is when staring at the ingredients on a box when you are eating, and the man had probably read his favorite cereal's ingredients 100 times before. But this time, what he saw caused him to sit up straight and grab the box as he read. Nutrition facts. Ingredients: modified cornstarch, corn syrup, whole grain corn, cornmeal. Feeling a little queasy, he put the box down and dropped his spoon. He tried sipping his coffee instead, but then his eyes fell on the coffee creamer, and the first thing he saw was corn syrup solids. The man got up a little unsteadily, picking his feet up unnecessarily high off the floor as he went to Bonzo's bowl in the corner of the kitchen and opened up a bag of dog food on the kitchen counter. He scooped a generous amount into the bowl and watched as Bonzo rapidly slurped the nuggets down, which usually made him smile, but instead he felt a strange uneasiness and then a growing sense of dread. Almost involuntarily, his eyes were drawn to the ingredients on the dog food bag, and this is what he saw: ground yellow corn, corn gluten meal. Frowning, the man wiped sweat from his brow and then went to his pantry and started looking at the boxes and cans on the shelves, reading ingredients at random and muttering nonsense to himself as he paced, lifting his feet high off the floor as he read. Nutrition facts: corn flour, corn starch, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, corn. Turning to his phone screen, the man became more agitated still as he read about baking powder, caramel coloring, dextrose and dextrin and maltodextrin, citric acid, cellulose, fructose, lactic acid, monosodium glutamate, ascorbic acid, sorbitol, and starch. You get the idea. He read about corn in toothpaste, and corn in shampoo, corn in multivitamins, corn in nasal sprays, and corn in his car's fuel tank. He finally put the phone down, realizing that he had knocked over everything on his pantry shelves. Bonzo was sitting in the corner and watching him warily, and that he was late to get to his coffee shop. Nonsense, nonsense, the man muttered without much conviction as he hurried out the door. Once outside, the man took a deep breath and looked around at the familiar street, trying to calm down. It was a pleasant summer day in his busy city, and there were plenty of other typical people passing by, discussing the latest news or laughing at their phone screens. He began to feel a little better as he started to make his way to his coffee shop. Then, suddenly, a woman standing on the opposite corner caught his eye. She was a small woman in a crisply tailored suit, carrying a fashionable leather briefcase. For some reason, he found himself moving closer, trying to unobtrusively get a better look at her. Something about her. The man realized that she looked just like the little businesswoman in his dream. She wasn't wearing a name tag, of course, but as he moved closer, eyeing her uneasily, a glint of gold on her lapel caught his eye. Was it? What was it? A lapel pin. It was an ear of corn. Startled, he stopped dead in his tracks and whirled around to hurry off in the opposite direction, lifting his feet high off of the ground as he did so. Nonsense, he stated out loud, which caused a family walking by to stare at him for a moment before politely averting their eyes from the man high-stepping down the street and muttering to himself. Because he went a different way than normal, the man was soon lost and found himself walking through a street fair. Looking at the food vendors, he noticed kettle corn and corn on the cob. He clutched his head with his hands as he looked at the cotton candy machine, knowing that it was likely full of corn, as was the steak on a stick, the turkey legs, the tamales. Oh yes, the tamales. Holding his head with both hands and high-stepping rapidly, the man lurched off down the street, paying no attention to where he was going, and not noticing the small woman trailing behind him. He was sweating profusely, and there was a strange rustly roaring sound in his ears. Eventually, the man found himself on a quiet street in an area of gleaming corporate complexes and mega warehouses. The lot he was standing in front of was huge, with a dense hedge of neatly pruned trees behind a chain-link fence, mostly concealing what was inside. A small gap where he stood revealed an open field of grass with several warehouse-like white buildings in the distance. Everything seemed quiet and cool in the shade of the trees. As he stood looking out over the empty field and smelling the grass, slowly the man calmed down, even managing to chuckle a little at his panic. What had gotten into him? Turning to go, he almost tripped over the small businesswoman. She was standing right behind him. He found himself unable to move as he stared at what she held in her hands, a bowl of his favorite cereal. "Hello," she said, holding the bowl out to him. "Aren't you hungry?" The man heard a rustling in his ears, like the cornfield in his dream. He felt strange, but the cereal looked good. Yes, he was hungry. He hadn't eaten anything today because he couldn't remember why he hadn't eaten. Eating seemed like a good idea. He took the bowl and started eating as the nice little lady smiled and nodded. Another voice suddenly spoke from the field behind him. "Is he ready yet?" The woman looked over his shoulder, and suddenly she didn't seem so nice. "Quiet," she snapped, then quickly turned back to the man. But the spell was broken. The man dropped the bowl to the ground. What was happening? He whirled and ran away in a blind panic, not realizing as he did that he had dashed through a gap in the fence and into the field. He felt drawn to something in that field. Something there felt safe. Suddenly, he tripped and fell down, into a deep hole in the ground. Though it was sunny out, he could see nothing, and the rustling sound was in his ears again. He found himself falling further into darkness. Well, that worked out well. The last thing he heard was the voice of the little woman. "Hand me a shovel." The man was dreaming again. He dreamed that he was wrapped up tight in a warm blanket. He couldn't see anything, but he heard earth crumbling and water trickling. He heard cows mooing distantly. He heard hooves walking above him, like cows had moved into the apartment above. That's odd, he thought. When did my apartment start letting cows on the lease? When the man awoke, he was standing in the middle of the field, and it was no longer empty. The cows were on a distant hill, and their cow pies were littering the field around him. The field was full of stalks of corn. Stalks of corn. The wind rustled gently through the field, and he found himself content to just sway for now. You see, he was no longer ordinary. He was no longer typical. He was no longer even just a man. He was Corn Man. The Story of Corn Man, written by Charles and Deirdre Wiley, illustrated by Andy Westhoff. Visit charleswiley.net/cornman for more information. This book is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are the product of the author's imaginations or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, locales, or persons, living or dead, is coincidental.